Does your app take more than 3 seconds to load on a mobile connection? I'm sure you've seen a lot of statistics showing how people walk away after waiting for 3 seconds, and how you can increase your chances for conversion dramatically by shaving off those precious milliseconds. But the question is why? Because our brains really expect immersive experiences. Our ability to focus has been plummeting in the past 10 years or so. Our brains really need to be walked through the content gently. So today, I'm going to be using my sliced bread approach to show how we can focus our apps on the critical path content and deliver that content as soon as possible. After this video, you're going to know how to apply this technique into your React applications. It's going to be extremely easy, and it's not going to take a lot of time. You can do that in just a few minutes. So why sliced bread? This is not a term you can Google. I just made it up. And here's why. Because when you offer someone a loaf of bread, they really need an extra step to consume that bread. This is why we say, something is great, a great invention, as great as sliced bread. Because when you offer someone a sliced bread, they can consume it immediately. They don't have to take that extra step in slicing. And this is exactly what we are doing. We are allowing our users to decrease the number of steps to consume our content. So we're going to be slicing it and delivering at their own pace. We're going to be using the reference app I call the Hog Store. The Hog Store is just a motorcycle store that has a few interesting sections. The sections that are often found on any page or any application, especially e-commerce. I'm saying e-commerce because you're obviously going to see the hero, which is this top image that has a certain call to action. The thing right below this is what I call the product section. Just shows a few motorcycles that we can choose from. And then finally, we have a bunch of yada, 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 just a text that scrolls down indefinitely. And finally, the footer. On the window on the side, we see this representation in form of code as well, and components. So we have the menu component, which is the menu above, the sidebar, which is the hamburger menu. And then we have the main section, which consists of the hero, then the products, and then finally the content. I'm calling it the boring content. It is boring to read all that text, but there's also a reason why it's boring. Because that content comes after scrolling down. The approach I'm taking is focusing on critical path. What I think the critical path is for my user, what I expect that to be, is the hero. I need to take a look at how my application performs. So my first step is to build it. Okay, the build shows a few files. So I have the main chunk, which is just the application's entry point. And then everything else is in chunk number 2, which has 400 kilobytes after gzip, which is worrying. Anything over 100 is worrying. Even 100 is worrying. I would really like to slice that in 1/10 of the size if possible. But let's see at how this really performs when it's built and served in production. I'm using a static server called serve, and the build is the folder where the output files are located at. To properly assess performance of the production application, I need to launch it in the incognito window. That means that most of or all my Chrome extensions have been turned off, so it's clear and clean as possible. Now I need to open the development tools, and I'm going to focus on the performance tab. In the performance tab, I'm going to make sure that I have enabled advanced pane instrumentation just to show a few more things. I'm going to show you exactly what. My network is going to be fast 3G. Obviously, I don't want to be reading the resources directly off of the hard drive. I need to simulate the network. And as I said, we need to focus on mobile networks. So fast 3G is going to be a great baseline. Going back to network, I make sure that the disable cache option is turned on. That check needs to be on. This means that we are not loading from browser's cache. We are actually going to fetch every resource. Going back to performance, I'm going to reload the page by clicking this circle button, and it's going to start profiling right away. Let's take a look. So I'm focusing on 3 flags. The first flag is first paint. First paint is the time when something really changed on the screen. Before that, we had the previous render that's seen on the screenshot. This is the render from the page before it was reloaded. Then the browser received the HTML document and painted the black background. Finally, after a long time, I'm starting to see something. And at that point, we see both first contentful paint, which is just the first content, and the first meaningful paint. It happens to be at the same time mark just about. And here's a screenshot. We just see ride your hog for $4.50 a month and just a few boxes. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. And yet it comes at close to the 4,000 milliseconds, 4-second timeline. That's a bit late. That's a bit too much time, but why? And here's exactly why, because this chunk.js takes a lot of time. It takes almost 3 seconds just to load this huge JavaScript. Well, it's not just loading, it's loading and parsing and executing. So to save our browser from doing all that, we need to serve a bit less than almost 400 kilobytes. Now, let's see how we do that. Before we do that, actually, I'm going to go to the audits section. The audit section, I'm really interested in performance only, is something that people often do, often use, Lighthouse. And just because of that, just because people like audits, Lighthouse audits, I want to show how they actually show on the screen. I'm definitely going to get a few false positives. I'm seeing false positive because this is not a production server, so not everything is really configured to deliver the best performance, but oh, I'm getting 71. All right, this is bad. To get this closer to the reality, I actually deployed this website on a production server. I used Netlify. This is going to make our audits look a bit better, a bit more, real life. Okay, sadly, in real life, we are getting even worse results. That's good for me because it shows how much benefit we're going to get. But this is really bad. Okay. Let's go back to the code. Let's take step 1. Let's make the minimal improvement. The minimal improvement I'm talking about is going to mean the following. I want the hero to be loaded first, and everything else can be loaded later. That means everything else can be lazy loaded. To do that, I am going to use Suspense in React. Suspense is often used with React.lazy. So I'm importing both from React. If you look at the Suspense documentation, you're going to know that it's important to use Suspense at least once. So you could technically use it from the root of your application. I'm going to do just that for a second. Suspense also needs the fallback attribute or property. And the fallback is going to be the component that shows until the lazy loaded components are actually loaded. I'm going to use div, and I'm going to type loading just so we can maybe see this happening in the application. Okay, now that I wrap my entire application in Suspense, I need to use React.lazy to make sure that some of the components are lazy loaded. Let's start with the sidebar because it's the topmost component that I really want to offload. There's nothing very scientific in how React.lazy works, and the documentation is good, so I don't want to focus on that too much. But basically, we feed it with a function that returns a promise, the promise we get from the import statement. Because this application uses create React app, it has Webpack embedded. And Webpack is going to recognize this import function, and it's going to create a code split point. So the sidebar is going into a separate file. I will repeat the same thing for other content. And this is basically it. Everything in my component tree stays the same, But React now knows through Suspense that there is some asynchronous content that's coming in and is going to wait for it before it actually shows the content. Okay, we have the exact same content as we used to have, but now let's see the dynamics of loading components. Going back to the Performance tab, I want to restart profiling of this page. This is still development, so chunks are a little bit larger. However, the dynamics are going to show just as well. If we zoom in into this section when content actually happened, we see that we did not achieve much, so something is not right. The screenshot shows that obviously we are still getting everything in one frame. What I expected to see is the hero show first, and then we see the rest of the page. And I'll show you exactly what's wrong with this picture. Suspense is wrapping this whole block. And because Suspense knows that there is asynchronous content, it's pausing the render of the entire block until everything asynchronous has loaded. So here's what I should do. I should wrap Suspense around sections that are asynchronous so that menu and hero remain synchronous. Okay, here we are. So menu is outside of Suspense, hero is outside Suspense too, and everything else is properly wrapped into their own Suspense tags. Let's do the drill once again. I'm going back into my Performance tab, and I'll reload the audit over again. Okay, I can already see, based on these small thumbnails, that something important has changed. Now take a look. And this is exactly the dynamics I was hoping to achieve. I'm getting the hero first, and then I get the rest of the page. Step by step. Okay, now this is almost good. There is one problem, and the problem is represented in this image. I don't want terms and conditions to show before the products. I think products are more important than terms and conditions. Products is my secondary priority. So the hero is my topmost priority, my critical path. The products, or the motorcycles in the squares that you see on the left side, this is my secondary priority. So I want to make sure that the motorcycles come in second. This is going to be a little more demanding. Here's why. The products use an animation library. This animation library is wired in some other places as well. You can see the flashes, and you can see how motorcycles change places. This is just an exaggerated method to show that it's animated. Another place where we have animations is the hamburger menu. Hamburger menu animates items, as you can see, when it's opened. Now they use the exact same animation library. So to properly load this and to ensure that products show as soon as possible, we want to show them even before the animation library has loaded. And let's see how we can do that. In my current file tree, I navigate to products and open index.js. In index.js, I see that we have the motion library from Framer Motion. I really like that library and I like using it. Framer Motion has motion A and motion div, which are substitutes for anchor and div elements in HTML. My goal now is to use React.lazy to load the motion library. In the meanwhile, I'm going to fall back just to regular A and to regular div. I'm going to take an extra mile here, and I'm going to make sure that I have my own wrapper for the motion library. This way, I can import the motion library in just one place. I can import all the bits that I need: motion A, motion div, motion UL, unordered list, motion LI, list item, and I can re-export and reuse that same motion library over again. I'm only going to use React.lazy and Suspense in one file. This is the file that imports motion library and re-exports the parts that I actually need. If this sounds advanced, it's really not. It's super simple. Come with me, take a look. At this point, I'm creating my own animated component. In the animated component, I'm importing motion library and I'm re-exporting the parts that I need. To import the motion library, I need to substitute the regular import with the dynamic import. Now this is really not going to work because Framer Motion does not output the default export. And we know that because we use curly braces. And then we retrieved an object that had motion.a, if you remember that. React.lazy really depends on default, so we're going to need to trick it. This is how we tricked React.lazy to import a non-default export. In this example, we actually just used the then from the promise, and when we get back to module, we import the motion object and then the div component. We name it as the default. Finally, we create our own custom component. We use Suspense to wrap it because we actually want to properly fall back to a regular div. If there is a class name, we're going to pass through. If there are children, we're going to pass through. I'm intentionally not just passing props through because I may be sending motion library specific properties. Those properties may not be compatible with the HTML's div element. So I'm only taking care at what properties I'm really passing through. Finally, I use motion div that I lazy imported to pass all the props to that component. I use this a lot. And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of tricking React.lazy into using the alternative name for the default export. So I created a library. That helps me do that every time with the same syntax that I used earlier with React.lazy. I'm calling this library React.lazy name because I'm importing named imports. And I use it just the same as I used before, but with a comma, with another argument that goes into the lazy method. That's motion.div. Okay, finally, what I did with motion div, I'm going to replicate with motion A. The fallback is a bit different because I want to pass the href attribute as well. And then motion li and motion ul. Just the same drill all over again. But the thing is, I export every single one. I export animated div, animated A, and so on. These are named exports. And when I import them, React is going to do the same thing over again. Suspense, lazy loading, show on the screen. While it's lazy loading, show the fallback. If I navigate back to my products, index JavaScript, I'm going to see the difference. So instead of importing the Framer Motion library, I'm importing my custom animated component. And I just renamed from motion.a to animated A and animated div. And I'm applying that below, just the same thing, different name, but does the very same thing. And this is the whole trick. You can lazy import any library. In fact, you should. You should lazy import any library, and you should also create your own custom component that does that for you. So it's easy for you to replicate that in any other component. I no longer need to use React.lazy all over the place. I just use that in just that one component, my custom component. Going back to my custom application, I want to hit that profile again and see the difference, okay? This is going to be good. All right, let's take a look at this progression. This is really all I asked for. I see products, I see the placeholder for terms and conditions, but products are going to show earlier than terms and conditions. The beautiful thing about using Netlify is that it allows me to create a deploy preview for any branch and any pull request. This time I created a special branch with the finished product and I deployed it to Netlify. Using performance section again, I'm going to restart the profiling. Okay, if you look at the progression right now, exactly what I hoped for is happening. Let's take a look. So the document has loaded, black screen, and then really soon, somewhere right after 1.5 seconds, I see the hero, at least the content, because the image has to load. Okay, the fonts have loaded, and then I see the image. Finally, not finally, but next thing, I see my secondary priority for the screen, which is the products. I'm going to run the Lighthouse audit again. Wow, this is amazing. I expected the results to be good, but not this good. This is quite an improvement. Okay, if you remember, the results were about between 3.7 and 4 seconds for most of these items, but we are getting way below this. If you want explanations on each of these items in this grid, you can toggle descriptions in this button, because this is way better than expected. All right, so we just proved that you can get even a sub-second loading time with this approach. So it's not about showing your entire content. It's not giving the whole loaf of bread. It's giving the sliced up content so in the pace that users can consume, because the focus is really limited. We don't have infinite focus. We can focus on one thing at a time. And that's a beautiful image, large text, and the beautiful big call to action that draws attention. We want to focus on that. You can set your priorities throughout the page and force or hint the resource loading so that things load according to your preferences. Now, I prefer the critical path to go first, then the secondary priority, and then everything else. Burgers, menus, footers, anything that's below the fold, below the viewport, is never a priority. Anything that's up top, anything that's flashy content that you want people to take action on before anything else, that comes first. And with this example, we showed how you can use the powerful Suspense and React.lazy capabilities of React. You can really do that in just a few minutes and see how your application performs a lot better. This is something we use in a lot of projects. This is something that billions of people use based on what we have built into our customers' projects, and it's working. It's working in production. It's working beautifully. It creates better customer experiences through a smarter code delivery. Feel free to use that right away today. If you have any questions, reach out and let me know. If you think this content was useful, please feel free to like it and share with your network. Also take a look at some of our other videos on this topic. I really like Gimbal, which is a tool that's going to help you maintain your performance budgets.